I'd like to thank Dr. Manoranjan Das for giving me this opportunity. He's been a mentor and a close friend of mine at Arvind. And in the next few minutes, I'll try my best to make the Pentacam as simplified as possible. We won't be covering all the aspects, but a little bit on the refractive screening, ectasia screening will be covered. Just out of interest, how many of us here in the audience are working on a Placido-based system entirely? Can you please put your hands up? On the OBSCAN and Pentacam? So the Pentacam has indeed been one of the best slit scanning topographic devices, which has made a huge change in anterior segment evaluation. I have no financial interest to disclose. So unlike a topography machine, this is the first machine to describe anterior segment tomography, which is similar to the CT scan, where multiple slices of the cornea up to the anterior segment are taken. These slices are merged and a three-dimensional image is created. Compared to the OBSCAN, where actually the OBSCAN 1 had come up with a device like this, then they added the Placido disc for the OBSCAN 2. That was because the image acquisition was a problem and generating accurate and reproducible data was a problem. And this is how the Pentacam has performed better over the OBSCAN, which I'll explain in the next few slides. So the Pentacam has a central beam which cuts through the cornea and creates around 50 Schumflug images in around 2 seconds. 500 measurements are taken from each slit image, representing 25,000 through elevation points and a three-dimensional model of the entire eye. So this is the Schumflug camera, which actually rotates around the central beam which cuts through the cornea. And then you have another camera right in the center which actually looks for eye movement and corrects for any changes due to that. So the advantages over the OBSCAN is here you have a machine which is independent of axis, orientation and position, represents a true corneal shape. The elevation maps, in addition to the best fit sphere, also have the option for an ellipse and a toric. It provides limbus to limbus measurement in almost all cases. So unlike in OBSCAN where tear disturbances, pellucid degeneration, peripheral thinning may be missed out, you can capture that on a Pentacam. There's no obscuration in abnormal corneas. The central corneal data points tend to overlap. Here you have a slit image which is cutting right through the center of the cornea and then spinning around 360 degrees. So in each image you have representation of the central 5 millimeters. So you have much more representation of the central cornea and a more accurate representation of the posterior surface of the cornea as well. As we all know with the OBSCAN, one of the limitations was the reproducibility of the posterior surface, especially in cases of keratoconus and post-refractive patients. Pentacam provides much better reproducibility and much better accuracy. So what exactly is the principle behind the Pentacam? This is exactly the Schumflug principle. It describes the optical properties involved in photography of objects when the plane is not parallel to the film of the camera. So normally when the plane is parallel to the film, when you take a photograph, the entire image is very crisp and clear. But when you're imaging a landscape and you take a photograph, the objects beyond and within that focal distance will be blurred. So it's very important when you're actually devising such an instrument that the image is crystal clear. So it's actually became famous because of Theodore Schumflug, but he gives the credit to Jules Carpentier, who has earlier mentioned it. This is normally, when you take an image, you'll see only one part in focus. But Schumflug devised a principle where he could increase the depth of focus of the camera, and he just proposed that by keeping the image plane and the camera lens plane at an angle to each other, they came together at a particular point called as the Schumflug intersection, and this helped to improve the depth of focus of the image, achieving a better clarity of an image and then a better representation of data obtained. This is used in view cameras, which are used for film photography while filming landscapes or very tall buildings. So this is the Schumflug image. This is the slit section that is actually seen by the camera when it is spinning around the central axis. And this image, once it is crisply obtained with the Schumflug principle, each of these data points can then be merged together and a three-dimensional image can be obtained. So role of Pentacam, I mean, it is predominantly one of the best tools to investigate any patient, whether you're suspecting an early ectasia, whether it's a pre-refractive patient coming in for a LASIK surgery. ICL preoperative workup can also be done. IOL power calculation following refractive procedures, progression of disease and outcome of treatment like cross-linking, and finally a small role in glaucoma evaluation. So this is the Pentacam scan, which the most common option used is very similar to what we also do in OBSCAN topography. You have a keratometric map, a global pachymetry map, And then you have the elevation maps of the front and back surface. Here we're using the word elevation and not curvature because we're not using a Placido-based system. And elevation is a true representation of data of the cornea from the iris plane. So quickly going is, after the demographic data is taken down, we actually first look at the keratometric map where we see the laterality of the eye, the small zone hidden by the eyelid. Here the pupillary centration. Almost all the cases you'll see that the dotted line is right in the center of the pupil, unlike in an OB-scan where many times it goes ahead with image acquisition even though the pupil is not bang on in the center, and then you may actually have a decentered apex and which represents as a pseudokeratoconus. Here the zones 3, 5 and 7 are marked, and then you have to see the color coding to make sure that you're seeing the same maps or the same follow-up of the patient. So according to the keratometric map, we have various topographic patterns here, right from round, oval and steep. The main problem when we're looking for ectasia is look for non-orthogonal astigmatism. So the asymmetric bow tie or an inferior bow which is more steep than the superior, all these are indicatives of probable ectasia which has to be looked at with also the pachymetric indices. So then we go to the keratometric values, and here the keratometric representation of data is a little less complicated compared to the OB-scan. You have the radius of curvature of the front surface, the back surface, the mean radius of curvature, the axis of astigmatism, and then you have two values over here which indicate the radius of the zone between the 7 and 9 mm ring, and R min, which is the smallest corneal curvature. So many times when I'm seeing a case of keratoconus and I look for follow-up, we really don't, we only look at the K1 and K2. Well, actually the cone may be in the peripheral zone of the cornea, and you may actually have to look at R min or R per to actually see for progression of keratoconus. The topometric map, you also have the QS, which is the quality standard. It should be an OK, a white zone. If it is yellow, that means some data acquisition is a problem, and if it is red, then you have to repeat the scan. The Q value indicates the asphericity of the cornea. It analyzes the 6 mm zone. The normal cornea should generally be less than 0.5. A prolate cornea, you get negative Q values, and an oblate cornea, post-refractive surgery, you get positive values. Curvature maps to the OB-scan had a limitation because curvature is reference-based and it changes with the angle of evaluation. And the third problem is that we assume that the apex line of sight and the reference axis are the same, when most of the times it's not exactly that. So you have different float types where you have, this is the common float shape. Dr. Manoranjan Das has explained how these are evaluated. So in elevation maps, you have the sea level concept, but in addition to the best fit sphere, like this is a case of with the rule astigmatism, and if you see the best fit sphere being used as a reference surface, we get the typical horizontal wedge pattern. But if you actually use the toric ellipsoid as a reference surface, you get a perfectly normal flat cornea. Unfortunately, however, since our eyes have been trained to see best fit spheres, we are still keeping that as the same program in all our when we program the machine. But eventually I think we'll have to move into cases where the computer helps us to decide in which cases we can use a toric or a toric ellipsoid as a reference surface so that we don't overdiagnose ectasias. So using the toric ellipsoid as a reference surface, they did studies and found that in the anterior elevation map, values of more than 15 are definitely suspicious of keratoconus. And in the posterior float, similar numbers 5 microns higher, that's around 20, are again indicative of an ectasia. The difference between back and front more than 5 is again significant. So we need not actually remember these values because as time changed forward, there were more software developed, and now we have the Berlin-Ambrosio display, which helps in better analysis of probable cases of ectasia. This is a corneal thickness map which has a global pachymetry, and you can plan for an intact placement in a keratoconus, look for presence of thinning. You have the pupillary center, pachymetric apex, and the thinnest location. Here again, these three values are very important because again, they say that in keratoconus, you have to look at the thinnest point in the cornea, the relationship to the pupillary center. In most cases, it is either temporal or inferior temporal in location. A distance of more than 1 millimeter is significant, and a difference in pachymetry of more than 10 microns is again significant. You also have some miscellaneous data at the bottom down, which can be used for glaucoma evaluation, as well as the corrected IOP measurement. The corneal thickness over here in a pentacam is extremely comparable to the ultrasound pachymetry. However, there have been very minor differences in patients post C3R treatment and post LASIK. But definitely compared to an OB-scan in a post LASIK topography, you're more likely to get a thinner cornea with an OB-scan as compared to a pentacam. So glaucoma screening, as I told earlier, it has a very small role. It is a non-invasive technique and it has a good quantitative measurements. So in cases of central and peripheral anterior chamber, the anterior chamber volume, detecting angles with a narrow chamber, and they say that an angle of less than 25 degrees or a chamber volume of less than 100 is again highly predisposed to an angle closure glaucoma. Refractive surgery has really changed in evaluation after the introduction of the software by Dr. Michael Bellin and Dr. Renato Ambrosio. These are called as the Berlin-Ambrosio Enhanced Ectasia Display. This is what the map looked like. Just to briefly understand is we'll take the left half of the map separately and the right half separately. And this is the progression of corneal thickness. The work was mainly done by Professor Renato Ambrosio. So we've already understood the concept of a best fit sphere. It's simply saying is you measure all the points on the cornea and then you find one value which helps to equal out all the depressions and elevations. What is an enhanced best fit sphere? In addition to this best fit sphere, here probably is you may miss out a localized area of an ectasia only because you're averaging out all the values. The enhanced best fit sphere, it assumes that 3.5 millimeters around the central thinnest point in the cornea is excluded, and then you retake the best fit sphere. So if the difference between this best fit sphere, 7.61, and this one, 7.48, is significant, that means there was a significant area of ectasia or an elevation around the thinnest point. So you have a thinnest point and you have an elevation which is significant. This really increases the sensitivity of picking up cases of keratoconus. The sensitivity in the anterior float is around 16%, and in the posterior float is almost around 85%. So here you can see that this is the elevation of the front, this is the best fit sphere of the anterior surface, and then excluding the 3.5 millimeters around the thinnest zone. Here again I'm saying 3.5 millimeters is not around the center, it's around the thinnest point in the cornea. And that's what makes this extremely sensitive. Here you have a very large area which is almost a difference of around 14 to 15 microns, making this probably an astigmatic cornea, probably ectatic. We have to look at the posterior float as well. The corneal thickness spatial profile. Here, the hypothesis is that as we move from the thinnest point in the central cornea to the periphery, the cornea moves in the form of a very gradual slope. It is not a sudden thickening, it's not a sudden progression. In keratoconic corneas, however, there is a sudden progression from the center to the periphery. So after studying a huge number of cases, they actually plotted a graph in which they had a variation of the thickness right from the central thinnest point, that is 0, and at each and every ring away from the center, 2, 4, and 6 mm away from the center. They averaged out the values of 22 concentric rings around the pachymetry of the cornea, and they studied the progression. They found it to be a very gradual slope, and they plotted a graph with plus or minus 2 standard deviation within 95% confidence interval. So this is the progression index, which also indicates a similar graph, that the change in progression or the percentage thickness increase from the center as we move to the periphery is a very gradual slope. Here again, they pay particular importance to the zone between the 2 to 6.5 millimeters, and beyond 6 mm, if the graph or the red line drops out of the standard deviation, it is not as significant. The progression index, again, the average value, minimum and maximum, and a progression index of more than 1 is suspicious of an inconsistent cornea. So here again you have a cornea where both the anterior and posterior float show the red zone on the enhanced best fit sphere, and you have both the percentage thickness increase and the CT PSD almost running on the borderline. You definitely would look at this patient again, and you have to go based on history, clinical findings, and then on these topographic machines. You're not supposed to jump directly on a topographer. The BAD2, the BAD2, is basically these indices which are there at the bottom of the pachymetric progression map, which indicate what is the difference in this patient compared to the general population, and does it fit into that criteria of less than 0.5% of the general population would have this. So you have DF, anterior posterior surface, the pachymetric progression, thinnest point, displacement, and finally the average. So in an ectasia evaluation, you have a patient coming like this with a corneal topography almost around 47, 48, and a very thin cornea, non-orthogonal astigmatism. It definitely would look like an ectasia to me. But when you actually go in and see that, it's just the anterior float of the cornea which is representing the astigmatic cornea. The posterior float is perfectly fine, and the pachymetric progression index up to the 6 mm zone is within normal. So at this point of time, I would label it as an high astigmatism with a thin cornea, and wait for follow-up to see the progression, whether there is a progression or not. Another advantage is in cases like pellucid marginal degeneration, where you actually get representation of the peripheral cornea. You get to see the whole lobster or the claw pattern, which is often missing in an OB scan. This is a follow-up case of post-cross-linking, where you have this comparison maps, where you can take the pre-CXL and post-CXL values on the same map, and then look for the effect of the cross-linking, whether it is stable or whether there is any improvement. Here's a case of LASIK evaluation. A patient came who was rejected for a LASIK. He showed an inferior steepening area on OB scan along with a thin cornea, so two significant risk factors. When he came to us, we actually repeated the OB scan, and here again I say the repeatability of OB scan in abnormal corneas is pretty low. So when you actually even tell a patient that you have a progression for keratoconus, you should have a threshold of at least 1.5 diopters in an OB scan and 1 diopter in a pentacam. If it comes with 47.2 and then you have 47.4, you can't call it as progression. So here again we did an OB scan topography for him because we had the device. And then we again did a pentacam, and then we found it was perfectly normal. So what exactly went wrong with the earlier OB scan? We went on to see that the keratometric diopter steps were almost 0.5 millimeters, which is trying to magnify. It's like going very close to the moon and seeing how many craters are there on the moon. The acoustic factor for pachymetry evaluation was almost the same, 0.92. And what we had was 1 diopter color steps with almost a similar 0.94 acoustic factor. So again, when you're looking at topography maps, especially from another center, you have to look again at the basics of topography, look at the color coding, look at the step patterns, and the other parameters. So we went ahead with the normal topography and went ahead for a LASIK. Post-LASIK patients, it's good to do a topography, especially if a patient is having complaints. Don't neglect them. Yes, there are at least 10 to 15% of patients who will have perfectly normal corneas. They'll have glare and halos. But sometimes you may have an irregular cornea over here. This patient had hardly around 1.5 diopters of astigmatism, and with the surface topo treatment, he's post-operatively extremely happy with no glare and halos. So low order aberrations can create the significant glare and halos and need to be corrected. Other advantages is the corneal wavefront analysis, which can be done with the pentacam. However, the iTrace and other devices are better for this. Equivalent K readings, which can be used for post-LASIK and post-refractive surgery patients for evaluating the corneal dioptric power, which can then be introduced into the Holiday 2 formula for providing a better estimation of the intraocular lens power at the time of cataract surgery. So conclusion is that corneal tomography has improved the understanding of corneal optical function and has become a vital part of the armamentarium of the refractive surgeon. Future users include correlation with aberrometry and bioptics. However, we're actually looking at integration with corneal hysteresis. So let us all admit that most of us, when we invest these devices, they come along with a LASIK machine unless you want to independently invest, which is extremely expensive. And integration with corneal hysteresis is something that we have to look forward to help to identify cases which go on for ectasia in spite of the best devices. Thank you.